Alrighty, welcome everybody. Let's get started. Before we get going, just to get an idea of who's in the room here with me. Who's a GP, practice managers, other clinical staff? Anybody from PCNs, ICBs? Great, excellent. My next question for you, who here enjoys managing multi-morbidity in their practice? Designing the searches and the procedures to make sure everything gets covered throughout the year, booking all the necessary appointments, working with the QoF business rules to make sure you stay on top of recall. It's a huge job to stay on top of throughout the year. My name is Graham. I'm the CTO of MedLink. My two co-directors, Mark and Lawrence, are both GPs. They'll be joining us in a few minutes for the Q&A. And they've lived out this reality in their own practices of dealing with recall. And our desire as a company has been to bring this process into the 21st century. Over the past 5 years, MedLink, we've grown to about 200 practices across the UK, covering about 2 million patients. And here at EMIS NUG today, we're excited to release our new product, which is automated multi-morbidity recall. So MedLink Recall is a fire and forget solution to managing recall in your practice. Within each patient's birth month, we run a search on that patient's record, identifying all the conditions that they have. We then create a bespoke multi-morbidity review for that patient. We invite them to it by email, SMS, or phone call. And then the key aspect is we then file the details of that invite back into the record. On the patient side, they receive the invitation to their review. They access it using their date of birth to log in. And then they'll see all their different conditions that need reviewing. Our reviews have been used individually over the past 4 years and are known and have received a lot of feedback that they're engaging. They give a lot of good signposting to local resources. But the key thing here with the multi-morbidity review is no longer does the patient need to do different reviews for different conditions throughout the year. Now it's all in one place. With MedLink Recall, they have it all in one go, once a year. Once they submit it, it goes to the final step of the process, which is workflow, which is how you in the practice see and deal with the patient's responses. Now, as it comes back into the practice, it's held within the MedLink workflow inbox, pending review. Clinicians can log in, see the responses from the patients, view that, file it to the record, and then contact the patient at the same time, and then crucially, filing it all straight back into the record. Both ends of this process, from recall to workflow, are fully assured by EMIS and NHS England and are available today for you to use in your practice. So that's kind of the bird's eye view of the process. Now we're going to look in more detail at each of these 3 steps. First of all, recall. That's why we're here. The primary aspect of our recall product is scheduled. We schedule it throughout the year to make sure every patient gets covered. And we start by searching. We assign each patient a recall date within that patient's month of birth. Now, this is fairly typical of how recall is done in practice already, and it's a great way for you to stay on top of knowing why they're invited in a month and for the patient to understand why they were invited at that time. We exclude weekends, bank holidays, and their birthdays and things like that, dates when they wouldn't want to be receiving an invite. And then when that date rolls around, we run the search on that patient. The first thing we do is we check, is the patient suitable for an online review? And so we look at things like, are they in a care home? Are they end of life? Things like that will make it unsuitable. And if so, we don't use MedLink Recall for them. You can, if you want, override those things with the customization, but as default, we exclude those patients. Once we know the general suitability is there, we check the patient for every condition that we offer. From pill checks to asthma to hypertension to, there's about 15 to 20 reviews that we cover. And for each of those conditions, in turn, we go through and we ask, does the patient have it? Is the condition already reviewed in the year? Has it been excluded for some other reason? And all of these questions are asked and answered using the QoF business rules. We update our code list to stay on top of it, and we only use QoF to determine whether the patient has the condition and whether they need a review. It's all based on QoF. And beyond that, it's customizable. Like I said, you can customize whether patients are excluded for various reasons. You can also customize which reviews are included. By default, we have it all turned on, but you can customize and say, well, I don't want it to include pill checks, for example. But it is available for all of those reviews. If the patient requires a review of at least one condition, we send them an invite. How do we go about doing that? We send them, first of all, we try and send them an email based on the email address that we pull out of the record. If we don't have an email, we send them an SMS. And finally, if they've opted out of those or we don't have those contact details, we place an automated phone call to their landline, giving them the details of the invite. If any method fails, we just roll down to the next one, and we track all the metrics of those messages so we can know if an email was delivered. We can know if an SMS was delivered. Once we know the patient has been contacted, we file it to the record with the details of exactly how they were contacted. The key thing about MedLink Recall is that instead of in the traditional form of running a search and asking the question, who has asthma and needs a review, and then manually inviting, MedLink Recall goes systematically through and goes, Joe Bloggs, what conditions does he have? And then we send an invite for all of Joe Bloggs' conditions, and then we move on to the next patient. So it's a slightly different way of doing it, but it covers all the reviews at one time. So with the invite here, it links to their personalized review. That review is built just for them. And then the key thing is it's coded into the record here. In this example, you can see the patient has 3 conditions. COPD and hypertension were due. HRT was already completed. We add in the invite codes so that you know in the future when you look at that patient that they were invited. And whenever we show what we're doing, we always give you the reason why we made the decision. Like, for example, here, it shows the code and the date the code was in the record as to why that condition was included. One of our main aims of building this system was to make sure that the data we put into the record is of high quality and easy to understand what we're doing. As we work really hard to make these consultations and the data that we put into the record easy to understand. If the patient hasn't responded to our invite within 2 weeks, we run the whole process again in case they've done a review in some other way, and then we invite them a second time and file that to the record a second time with the second invitation. That all happens with 0 manual input. Once you've turned on scheduled recall, that all happens in the background. You don't need to touch it. You don't need to worry about it. What about the communication cost? This has been a big issue because texting gets expensive, and there's a lot of concern about communication costs. With MedLink, there is no additional communication cost. It's included in the headline price of what we offer. No more searches, no more campaigns, no more communication costs. We cover that all for you. So how do you now see as a practice what your recall looks like? Here we have a screenshot of the scheduled dashboard, and you can see lines for each month of the year, and it gives you a progress update, so you can see how many patients have been invited, what's outstanding. And then at the end of the month, you can download a CSV list of everything that we have done. And that data will show you the patients who we did contact, what happened. It will show you the patients that we didn't contact because of exclusion rules, or patients that didn't complete their review. So it gives you a very clear set of information to give to the admin staff in your practice to know who to follow up with and what still needs to be done. As much as the process will cover the vast majority of patients, there are always going to be some for whom it's not suitable, and that way allows you to deal with all of the edge cases that weren't covered in the main area. The next part of it, which we imagine will get used less, but is ad hoc recall. This allows you to log into the app, log into our web application. You insert the patient's name and click search, and it runs a recall on that patient then live. And it will tell you what conditions that patient has and what needs doing. So in this case, we put in the test patient, we ran it, and it's telling us that COPD and heart failure is due, again with the reasons. Asthma and CHD are not required, and it gives you the reason why they're excluded. You can then click the button, and it sends them an invite, and that's an ad hoc recall. So that's a quick way to see what a specific patient needs in the front end that's different to the scheduled side of it. That's quite a lot of new information there on recall. So before I move on, are there any questions about the recall process or the search process before I move on to the next step?
So this is just based on, so is it based on just practice lists, or is there any case finding?
Is it based on practice lists? So It's based on the practice patient list that is uploaded into our system. So the first step of setting up MedLink Recall is uploading your patient list to our application, and then it's all based on that patient list. So Mark, about case finding, this is my colleague who's one of our co-directors, who's a GP.
So the system is based entirely on the existing codes within the system and built on QoF rules. So our system is not primarily looking at case finding where there may be incorrectly or inadequately coded data. That's not the focus of it. And there are lots of tools available to do that. But once the coding is there, we're obviously reliant on that coding. But if the codes are there, and we look through both the diagnostic codes, resolved codes, exception codes, all of the various complex QoF rules to identify both what conditions are there for the patient and whether or not the review is due.
Any other questions? Yes.
You were touching on this, but how does it present those patients that it excludes? So perhaps people like palliative care, housebound care homes, where we want to take different interventions.
So the question is, how do we present patients that are excluded? So that all comes in the CSV that you download at the end of the month. So you download that, and that will just give you a list of, in 2 sections, all the patients who we have not contacted with the reason why, but we will still tell you what conditions they have and whether the reviews are due. So it's very simple. You can go down and go, well, Joe Bloggs is in end-of-life care, but he has these conditions, and now it's up to the practice in the normal way to decide how to go about actioning that. And then we would show you in the second part everybody who we have contacted and the result of that, whether they went through with it or whether it was abandoned, they didn't actually end up completing the review. Does that answer the question?
Sorry, you did say you offer a multi-means of contact for patients, but if there isn't a mobile number, you'll automatically fail over and do a letter?
So we don't currently offer letters. So our communication order is email, SMS, phone call to the landline. So those are our 3. Letters we don't currently offer. If there is demand for that, that is something that we could look at in the future, but that's not currently included.
Okay, yeah, just slightly concerned on the email point. Although we're increasing numbers of that, proactively patients probably aren't expecting clinical correspondence via that route. So we would get some choice, would we, to say we can send a text message?
So within recall, for the automated recall, we preferentially use email. If the patient doesn't respond, then we will send an SMS as a follow-up to that. So we found, we already use email a lot in our invitations and in our follow-ups, and we find, I think it's about 80% of our patients actually give us their email address. And so we are often using verified email address where the patient has specifically opted in to using their email.
But to specifically answer your question, we do a dual invite system. The first invite, if the email's available, will go just by email. If there's no response, the second invite, 2 weeks later, will go by both email and text message containing the same link. And that then maximizes the chance of the patient actually seeing that if the email's putting things in junk or any other issues.
How do you decide on the scope of what constitutes a long-term condition? Because you mentioned QoF and then also pill checks, but what about things like polycystic ovarian syndrome?
So I'll come on to that very briefly, which will give you the list of the conditions we include. So that will be coming up in just a moment. And there was one more question at the back.
But just to answer a bit more of your question, so we have a portfolio of reviews that we cover, but there are clearly going to be conditions that may need review that are not included in there. So PCOS, for example, is not part of our system. As we increase the portfolio reviews, where appropriate, anything that can be included into an annual recall process. So, for example, we've been asked for things like AF and NDH, that if it's appropriate for both data gathering and information sharing with patients, that would be then incorporated into the multimorbidity review, and that's based on client feedback.
There's one more question in the back here.
I was just wondering, when the text emails go out, is it coded in line with the Arden's birthday recall as well? Is it coded?
So when we send the invite, it is coded, and we code specifically how it was sent and the address to whether the phone number or the email to which it was sent. With the specifics about the Arden's
I'm not sure what exactly you mean by in line with the Arden's. So can you go back to the recall status? So what you see at the bottom there is an EMIS consultation which shows each condition of the patient, whether the review is due or not, and then there's a line there that says invite codes. And so there is an invite code, which is generally the most generic code available, because we don't know if we're actually finally sending by email or SMS, because if it fails, we'll switch over. So we've used the most appropriate code in that situation that we know is a legitimate QOF code. So for every patient who goes through the recall process, they will either be invited and complete it or be invited twice, and therefore you won't be penalized as a practice, or you will fulfill your contractual requirements. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and we ensure that the invites, if they don't respond, the second invite doesn't happen until 2 weeks later, so fulfills the QOF rule of having the time gap between the two invites. If there's no more questions there, I'll move on to the next section, which will give you more detail of what's going on here. So, like I said, the key difference with recall is that instead of the traditional way of asking who has the condition, we go through each patient in turn and ask what conditions does this patient have and action them on an individual basis. So, that was recall. We now look at the multi-morbidity reviews from the patient side. Now, this answers your question of what reviews do we currently offer. So, our multi-morbidity reviews have been built on the back of our existing reviews, which have been used as individual conditions for about the last 5 years. And we found that engagement with our reviews is excellent across all age groups, with about 86% of our patients saying they liked our system. And we were really surprised initially at how good that interaction was, even at the higher end of the age groups. Simple reason being is most older people now have an iPad because they want to talk to the grandkids. And so even at the older age groups have means to access these online reviews. So these are the reviews that we offer. We've incorporated into the annual recall everything that fits within that annual process nicely. And then the other reviews on the right, the additional reviews, are these ones that can be sent out individually, opportunistically, as you like. And that's in line with how MedLink has been working up until now. But moving on to the multi-morbidity, these are the ones that we include in the annual review. Yes, we had a question.
Is there anything regarding hypertension? I know, so sometimes you end up with a big old list of hypertensive patients who need a BP, and you may not want that lumped in. Is there any way of kind of configuring that?
Yes,
or
absolutely.
separating it out?
So part of the configuration of recall is it allows you to choose which conditions do you want included. So when you set up, you could say, I want all the conditions except hypertension, for example, or any combination thereof.
And the other thing you can do, just to clarify, is that we know that every asthma review, there is a coded asthma review, but many hypertensive patients do not have a hypertension review coded, and we clearly don't want to be sending out invites. So in recognition of that, we have what we call an alternative review completion, where if you include hypertension, you can say, do you know what, if a patient's had a blood pressure checked this year, I don't want to send them a hypertension review. Now, that doesn't mean they have had it done, but it excludes those patients for whom it may be inappropriate. And so that's the same, again, for diabetes as well, with if they've had a foot check, an A1C, and a blood pressure check done. So we've tried to allow you as a practice to configure it around how you use coding, particularly coding the reviews themselves, to allow you to identify patients correctly and not over-invite.
So now let's have a look at what the patient sees when they come in. So they, like I said, their feedback is excellent, about 86% positive. This is what they see when they click on the link. It comes to the welcome screen, and we allow branding, effectively. You can brand this part of our application with the name of your practice. You can put a welcome video on from one of your partners in your practice. And things like this, we've seen it massively improves engagement. The patient logs in and they see somebody who they know, and they're like, oh, okay, I immediately have a much higher level of trust in this than I otherwise would have. So that can help, but that's entirely optional. If you don't do that, we just simply show the name of your practice. Like I said, the review is specific for the patient, so we need to know who they are, and they just log in by putting in their date of birth to make sure that it's the right patient. Like I just said, it's customizable with the branding. And now this is what happens after they log in. Again, we just give them their initials, just an extra bit of saying, we know who you are. It helps with the engagement. And then we show them their conditions. Little introduction where they consent to using the system. In this case, the patient has 3 conditions that need doing, and they just work through them in turn. It gives them a clear idea of how far through the process they are. Where are we? The clinical content that we offer, we update regularly to keep it in line with national guidance. So we offer signposting, which you can configure as well to local resources which the patient can see and they can go to. So you can add things into these reviews that gives the patient extra information. And the other really good thing about doing a multi-morbidity review is it removes overlap. For example, a patient with two conditions, in this case, say with COPD and another condition that both require a review of their medication, normally they would have to answer those questions twice in two different reviews. Here, because it's all together, we know that a medication review is due, and so they only need to do it the one time as part of this annual process. So that's what the additional bit is at the bottom as well. And that works for all the ancillary data like weight gathering, alcohol information, smoking, all these extra lifestyle questions that we ask. They only need to answer it once in the year instead of every time we do the review. The other thing that we offer is at the end of each, so the content that we offer, we really try and provide engaging content with videos, with images, to help the patient as they go through the review. And at the end of each condition, so each of those three conditions, we said there, we ask the patient, how do you feel about it? So for example, with the pill check, they can just add in any comments they want to add to it. And then we always ask this question, how would you like to complete your review? Are you happy with it being done online, or do you want to follow up with someone at the practice? And what we found that in 92% of cases where we've offered this, the patient says, I'm good, I'm happy for it to be done online. So that means that when you as the practice review the data, if you agree clinically that it is safe and they are controlled, you can file it without needing to actually speak to the patient, a remote review. Or the patient has said they actually want to speak to someone, and then you can arrange a follow-up appointment. So we found in 92% of cases that patients are happy with a remote review. So moving on from that, so that's what the patient sees, the multi-morbidity reviews. They submit their responses. They see the signposting, additional information that you've given to them. The other thing that we do offer is sometimes there are incorrect codes in the record, and so the patient may receive it with 3 conditions, and they go, well, I don't have that. And we don't want that to be a barrier to them completing the review, and so we provide a function for them to skip it. They can say, I want to skip this review, and then they have to tell us why is it being skipped, like, I don't have it, or I used to have it, or something like that, so you as the practice can see, oh, there's something up here, the patient's telling me something, and then you can figure out what to do with that. But we do allow a patient to skip a condition if they believe it's not appropriate. So to summarize, the MedLink multi-morbidity review is unique for each patient based on the conditions needing review at that point in time when we send it. We offer high-quality, engaging questions and provide detailed information to the patient. They can complete it in their own time, any time of the day or night, and it's typically only required once a year to meet those QOF requirements. So then, the final step, what do we now do? Any questions on the patient side before we move on to the last thing? Yes.
I'll give you the mic just so that the recording is...
Thank you. On the slide that you had for the pill check, with the example of the patient commenting,
Yeah.
where does that information go back into? Is that another CSV that the practice would download?
So that will be displayed to the clinician in the very next module, which we're just about to get to. And yes, another question from the back here. Mark?
Yeah, so the principle is that obviously everything that the patient gives in the review is seen by the clinicians for...
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, so with the reviews, to what degree are they sort of like humanized and customized? You know, would it say for a diabetic patient, for example, you know, your latest HbA1c is X and this is actually an improvement? Does it spell that sort of information out?
No. So yes, we as MedLink have access to that data because we have access to the clinical record, but we do not surface that data to the patient. We made, as a clinical team, the clinical team made a risk analysis on that and decided we wouldn't be doing that.
The main principle with MedLink is that we're about from the patient perspective, we're a data gathering tool and an information sharing within patients. So we want when we talk about engaging in meaningful material, it's obviously asking the questions, but also giving, diabetes is a good example, information about retinal screening, information about self-foot care, information about injection, if relevant. So we've tried to do that. What we don't want to do is become a decision-making entity and become, therefore, a medical device. And that just adds a whole layer of additional complexity, which is unnecessary. So we don't do to that extent. What we can do is read whether an A1C is due, and certainly there's a potential for future development where if, say, an A1C is due on a foot check, where we could actually, we're currently working on EMIS self-booking links as part of the online review, actually surface a self-booking link to make the appointment for that to be done. That's a potential future development, because clearly as a clinician, what you want is all the information in front of you to make a decision. But no, we don't surface that data back to the patient. If that's required as part of the clinical review, then that would be done by the clinician.
So in the interest of time, let's move on to the last stage of the process, which is what do you do with all that data that we've gathered from the patient, to answer your question. So this is workflow. So the patient's completed a multi-morbidity review and it comes into the inbox. Now, we know that different conditions in the practice are dealt with by different teams. So the first thing we do is we separate the patient's responses into their individual conditions. So in this case, the same patient has completed 3 reviews, COCP, COPD, and a heart failure. 3 separate conditions that can be dealt with by different members of staff in the practice if necessary. To see the patient's responses, you simply click on the line and it takes you through. In this case, we now have their COCP responses. At the very top of the screen here, you can see the recall status. And by clicking on those buttons, you can effectively tab between the patient's different conditions if you want to see what their responses were to different conditions. Then you can see the actual patient's responses that they have given. Here we have kind of the general health data they provided, and then the review-specific data is down here at the bottom and continues on down. Every piece of information that the patient gives is displayed on this screen, including the free text comments that the gentleman asked. Everything is there for the clinician to make the clinical decision. That's displayed to you on the screen. And because we have access to the record, this is where we can display to you, the clinician, the patient's previous data. Whenever you see these blue bars on the right, this is the most recent data poured out of the patient's record to allow you as the clinician to compare to see what's going on. So for example, here, the patient's weight has increased from 70 kilos to 80 kilos. It just gives you a quick overview of what the recent change is on these metrics that we show.
On those last coded entry fields, essentially, how wide is that net on those? Is that like only QOF applicable ones, or have you got your own list of like wider codes?
We put it out, it is based on so the code that we would file for weight is the exact code that we are checking to see if there is a weight code there. So if it's coded on a slightly different weight code, it wouldn't surface. So it has to be the exact code that we are filing it in as, but all the codes that we do file as are QOF codes, so it should match as much as possible. The blue ticks that you see here, they all indicate codes that we are going to file to the record. So you can clearly see what's going into the record. As well as the codes themselves, we file a PDF, an attachment to the record with all the data. So you can always see in the patient's record all the data, but only codable data is actually coded, which in most cases is the vast majority of it. Even their comments are coded as a free text field. The other thing that you'll almost always want to do when you've reviewed a patient's condition is tell the patient that you've completed it. And here you simply type your message to the patient, and then when you're done, you hit File to Clinical Record. It files it to EMIS, it contacts the patient with the message, and you're done. There are some other extras that we do offer here. So for example, with asthma, regularly you'll want to give the patient an action plan, and we provide for asthma reviews a way that you can see the action plan, you can edit it as you like, and then when you send it to the patient, they get your message as well as their action plan with it. So we offer a few extras that's condition specific from this screen as well. So that all goes into EMIS. And like I said before, we've really tried with the data that we're putting into EMIS to be easy to understand and easy to read. So this here is that COCP review that we've put in, got all their, what's the word I'm looking for? All their general medical data like health, weight, smoking is all put together. All the things coming down. There's the attachment, the clinical comment that you as the clinician just wanted to write to the record, which is optional, and all the other things there. And then finally, the review codes to say this review has been done according to the QOF rules. And then back in, this was the top box that we saw on the recall status within our app. It now shows to the next clinician who logs in to deal with the next review, well, COCP has been done. They've sent that to the patient. So now they know what has been sent to the patient. So for the next reviews, there wouldn't be any overlap because you can see that all there. So all of this is through the new MedLink inbox, but what if you don't want to check a new inbox? We know that we trust that there's enough functionality within our inbox that would encourage you to use it, but we know that for some clinicians or for some conditions, you would really rather not have to check a new inbox. And so for that, we offer the autocode and email option. And now you can specify this for specific clinicians. So say you have Dr. Tom in your practice, he doesn't want to use a new inbox. Anything that would get assigned to him goes through this method, for example. How this method works is that when the patient submits their responses, we immediately file it to the record, but then we also email all the document into your existing workflow, typically DocMan. And then you can process it through your existing workflow, but the administrative task of all the codes going to the record is already done. So you see it come in, you pull up the patient, you can see all the data there, make the clinical decision, the admin task is removed. And like I said, the option of using either one of these two options is totally customizable per review or by staff member or clinician. So what's the impact of all of this? Why are we doing this? We believe it's going to help you save an incredible amount of time of automating your recall process. It's a fully integrated end-to-end system from recall through the reviews, through the workflow. You can set it up in about 30 minutes, and that's I reckon you could do it a lot quicker than that, but we're saying 30 minutes is a high end. It is very simple to set up. All you need to do is log in, upload your patient list, select the conditions, and turn it on. It gets your QOF completed. The vast majority of your QOF gets completed through this. It manages all the multimorbidities of your patients, and typically only needs to be done once a year. The workflow, we give you that intuitive display of their responses and then the ability to contact the patient and file it back to the record. No more EMIS searches, no more campaigns, no more additional communication costs. We do it all for you. How much does this cost? We offer this at what we trust is a very competitive price of 11p per patient per year. We offer discounts for PCNs and ICBs, and we also offer a 3-month free trial, no obligation. You can sign up today. We start the free trial from when you turn it on. You can use it for 3 months, and then we believe in our system enough that after that 3 months, we trust you're going to carry on with us. That's how much we believe in this product. But both of my co-directors, Mark, Dr. Widger and Dr. Kemper, are GPs themselves and have seen the impact of a system like this in their own practices, and that's where MedLink, the idea of MedLink, was born out of their desire to have a system like this. And so we're excited now to be able to offer this out across the UK to all the EMIS practices. So I'd like to invite you to come visit our stand later on in the day if you want to ask more questions about it. We have some leaflets, which I believe Dr. Kemper handed out. But if there's any more questions now, I'll be happy to take them. Yes?
Sorry, I'm hogging the floor here, but just to press again on the point of preparing for the review. So I'm non-clinical, but let's say it's a heart failure review. You know, we want you using ease and whatever else is relevant for that. How is that interacting? I mean, what we'd have to put manual steps in place for that as a practice to get that for now in order, would we? Because otherwise the docs are going to kick it back, or the nurse when they get, yeah.
So it largely depends. Do you want to take this, Lawrence?
Why don't you come up front, Mark?
It largely depends on how you already structure things. So it might be that I know a lot of practices will tend to do things like the bloods, the foot checks, maybe BP checks in advance, and then you during the month of birth. What we can do is you can within your communication to patients, you can ask them to get those done. So we're aiming to do with being able to read the record and with appointment booking, as I say, is to be able to incorporate that with so it would come to you and you're due your A1C, and it would ask you to book that appointment. As I say, that appointment booking is not yet available. So with that process, yes, that would still be a manual process within there. Because this is non-urgent, the information is then sitting in the inbox, and there is no urgency to deal with these things. So it's entirely feasible that you see that, somebody looks at it and says, actually, this is due. I can ask the patient to get it done and actually leave it there and look at it later. Or I can set myself a reminder to do that. So this is our first iteration of the product, and as more and more of that nuance of recall, what we aim to do is to automate as much as possible by virtue, be able to read the record, we can identify what is due. At the moment, that's primarily focused on the reviews themselves, but as we build that out, it will incorporate the other elements of the reviews as well.
Do in terms of that, you're still saying they've still got to be called in manually for the actual physical review?
Yeah, so as I was just talking about, those aspects that cannot be completed remotely by the patient. So blood pressure, obviously patients can and regularly do self-check, and we have a facility for presenting that information. In terms of the other elements of the review, those initially would typically be done after the review is complete. So a patient is in their month of birth, completes this process, and then is asked to come in for the additional process. That may not be necessary. The patient may have already had that done. So that's the current setup. As I say, we're working to improve that process to incorporate in those elements into the review process, particularly for diabetes.
The additional thing to add here is that if, for example, with diabetes, in completing the review, we have gathered all of the other data necessary so that when the patient does come in to do those other aspects, it's a much quicker process.
Except it's making it a three-stage process, isn't it, rather than a two-stage process, which would be just sending the invite, they come into their appointment typically with the healthcare system, and then an oral surgery will be with a pharmacist. With a review, you're having an extra clinical step where a clinician has to do the pre-review, if you like, as well. So it's actually...
So the other thing, so the other thing we can do is within the review itself, and actually you can customize some of the content. What we can offer is that within the introduction to, say, the diabetes review, it will say, welcome to the review and this to diabetes. Please, as well as completing this online, please also contact the practice to arrange blood test and/or foot check. So you could trigger the patient to do that at the same time as completing the online review. And then you are much more likely to have all the information available for that.
Send them an auto-link to book their appointments at the same time?
Not yet, because we're not live with EMIS auto booking, but that is coming as soon as we have that facility available.
It's just along the similar lines of the previous question. Now, in terms of the structured medication reviews, if a patient is under a shared care agreement, let's say for methotrexate or any of those medications, are we able to customize to just doing the blood test for those patients, like in 3 months or 6 months? Because those are the ones where it's easy to miss, and you see them on the alert, and it's only then you realize it's been a year or maybe around COVID that's the last test was done. Or is that something that's in progress in terms of, would we be able to expect that coming later on?
Yeah, I think the question was whether there's a way of incorporating medication monitoring and the blood tests that would be required for that. I think the system would allow for that to be developed. I think currently the main focus is of conditions and medications that are typically requiring an annual review. So I think it's not incorporated right now, but I think that's something that could be developed. And I think what we are developing and working on is looking at the record to see what medications the patients are taking and asking relevant questions to then allow more specific and relevant medication review, as opposed to asking generic questions of do you have side effects, but asking something specific to the medication they're on. So I think the opportunity will be there, but we're not there yet.
There's another question with that gentleman with the green jacket.
So I'll just make it quick. It's just about the medium of communication, because we're currently telling our patients that most of the communication will go to the NHS app. So is it, and I understand it's a free service also. Is this something in your pipeline to integrate?
Yes, we are in the process of integrating with the NHS app. We are waiting on them. We've gone through all the initial thing. They've told us they'll onboard us Q4 of this year, of this calendar year. So that's something that we hope will be done kind of around by Christmas, maybe early next year. And then that would be the top tier of our communication preference. It would go to the app first. If they haven't read the message in the app, then we go to email, SMS, phone call. So yes, that is in process. We would have done it 6 months ago, but the onboarding time with the NHS app is quite slow.
You mentioned earlier about uploading your patient list. Do you have to do that every month, or does it do it automatically after the first upload?
So that is a manual step at the moment of updating the patient list. You can do that as frequently or as infrequently as you wish. Of course, the patients who have come to your practice after you've uploaded the list, we don't know about. So the key thing is, as long as it's done before the end of the QOF year, whenever you upload the list, we check who are the new patients, who should have been done recall already in this year, and then we invite them. So whenever you upload a new list, we check to see who are the new patients in your practice and make sure they are included in the QOF year.
Contacting people that are deceased?
No, absolutely not. So as part of the exclusion area, when we check are they end of life or any of those aspects, we check at that point in time, are they a currently registered patient? And so that would cover the deceased aspect to it. So no, we make sure that that they're not deceased before we invite them, because that's
The principle is we run a check of the record, and we, as soon as possible, and we're talking within minutes, send the invite to the patient. So there is no lag between we're taking a snapshot of the record at that moment, and the invite reflects that. We would suggest a practice uploading a new list probably once every quarter or so, unless you happen to have a big flurry of new registrations for whatever reason at a particular time. And that's the only manual step that's required for maintaining the scheduled recall, is that list upload, which is a 5-minute job. It's a very simple process.